So we are recording with our guest today, Dr. Hamerlinck. If you wouldn't mind giving us just a real brief introduction to kind of who you are and what you do, and then we can jump right into some questions.
Of course. My name is Gabriella Hamerlinck. I am a teaching professor in the Department of Geography, and I teach within the medical geography unit. So all about the spread of infectious diseases across landscapes and populations. It's been a fantastic couple of years with everybody's lived experience with COVID to bring that into class. So my background is mostly in biology. My undergrad degrees, I went to a very small school in Minneapolis, Minnesota for my undergrad degrees in math and biology. Then I moved south all the way to Iowa for my grad work, where I was in the integrated biology PhD program, focused mostly on evolutionary biology and theoretical ecology. So that intersection of math and biology still. And I went into my first postdoc, and a postdoc is sort of this temporary position that you take after you finish your PhD for a few years. They're usually about 1 to 4 years long. So this first postdoc that I did, I moved north again to Wisconsin, where I worked in quantitative biology education. So I trained faculty from across the country how to bring more math into the biology curriculum. And then I actually moved south all the way to UF for my second postdoc, which was here in the geography department, where I worked with another faculty member here at the CDC Southeastern Center of Excellence in Vector-Borne Diseases, which is housed in the Emerging Pathogens Institute on campus. And that was my postdoc for only 1 year before I was asked to apply for this faculty position in our medical geography unit, where I have been since 2019. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Okay, folks, so you can go ahead and raise your hand as soon as you have a question. I will go to one from the list just to get us started. Sometimes it takes a minute for people to get warmed up and get over initial shyness. A lot of students in the asynchronous were really interested in some of your previous courses you've taught, particularly one I think called The Next Pandemic. So there were several questions related to that.
I taught that this morning.
Lexi Urinsky asked about what you think the future holds as far as pandemics, and could we have prepared better for the current COVID-19 pandemic?
That's a tough question to answer. So the course that has been getting quite a bit of attention is taught in 3 different units. So we start with our historic pandemics, where we learn about plague and influenza and smallpox, and think about the lessons learned from those pandemics and how we successfully ended those pandemics and what of that we might be able to apply to the future. And so I don't want to make any claims about, whether or not we could have done better. Because we certainly could have done better, but we also could have done a lot worse. So I think that it's a very intense balancing act to really consider what's happening like on the ground right now, and hindsight is always 2020. So it's difficult to make a claim about that. That class in particular, the final project for that class is where I asked students to design the next pandemic, using all the information that you've learned throughout the whole semester about what are sort of the scariest aspects of all of the pandemics that we've learned about, and put those all together into a brand new pathogen and a brand new disease, and then create a pandemic preparedness plan. So how would you plan for making sure that this pandemic disease that you've just designed or created, how would it not turn into a pandemic? Yeah. I love the class, obviously, but I'm a little biased because I designed it, so.
It definitely sounds really cool. More students are joining us, folks. I said to the initial group, if you can turn your camera on, please do, so our guests can see who you are. I don't see hands up yet. Oh yeah, I do. Ben.
Yeah, sure. Hi, how's it going? Thank you so much. So I guess my question would be, when the COVID pandemic came around, it seemed like we got a vaccine, pretty quickly, all things considered. And I'm sure that had to do a lot with the amount of doctors and the amount of people that were working towards this vaccine. And my question for you would be, in the future, if we were to have another pandemic similar to COVID or maybe even more extreme, who knows, what are the chances that we would be able to get a vaccine in the same, quick manner that we did this time? Or was that kind of just like, we got lucky? I don't know if that's a very full question or even if you can answer it, but just curious.
Yeah, so I can give sort of best and worst case scenarios. With COVID, the pathogen that causes the disease is called SARS-CoV-2. And with that pathogen, we don't have any other vaccines for any other of the coronaviruses. There are 7 known coronaviruses that are very closely related that cause disease in humans, including our pandemic forms of MERS and SARS. Very close related. The other 4 cause really mild effects in people. So we were really starting from scratch. The good news is that we were able to put out these new mRNA vaccines and a viral vector vaccine, which is what our Johnson & Johnson vaccine is, really quickly in the grand scheme of things. It may not have seemed like it when we were all in lockdown and whatnot, but a benefit of the mRNA vaccine is production time. So like with our annual flu shot, we make a new flu shot every year, but it takes us about 7 to 9 months in order to make enough of a flu shot and the right kind of components of our flu shot in order to have enough of it to protect our whole population. With the mRNA vaccine, the production time is really decreased, and so we're able to get that vaccine out the door a lot faster. Moving forward, now that we have this technology for an mRNA vaccine, it's a very powerful delivery tool. And we could hopefully be able to see a lot more vaccines turn into these mRNA vaccines, which would decrease our production time and be able to protect our population a lot sooner compared to some of our other vaccine technologies like live attenuated vaccines or inactivated vaccines and so on. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of an idea.
It did. Thank you.
Awesome.
While we're on the coronavirus topic, I promise you not all the questions are about coronavirus, but as you can guess.
That's okay. I'm teaching about it on Wednesday, so I'm all up on the new information.
Nice. Yeah, a good number of people, of course, are curious. So Jonathan Wukich submitted a question asking what role you feel that mathematical modeling or computer simulations might play in the future ability to predict pandemics, plagues before they happen, find treatments, cures, and if this played any role in the acceleration of the vaccine development for COVID-19.
So my bread and butter, all of my current research is mathematical modeling. So obviously I hope that it sticks around for a very long time because that is just what I do. And I do, it should stick around because it is a very powerful technique that we can use, but it's not flawless. So there are pros and cons to the mathematical and statistical modeling of diseases. The prediction piece is really great. We're able to use accurate estimation of parameter space in order to predict where a disease is going in the future, to get us sort of those best and worst case scenarios that we can then design our recommendations for policy implementation. With modeling, it's more difficult to connect that directly to the vaccine production, right? We use some form of predictive capabilities when we're thinking about how pathogens will mutate over time, right? We've got some information about, we know how frequently a nucleotide base of an A turns into a T with those random mutations. So we can use that to predict what's going to happen. And we do that for our flu vaccine every year. But with developing these brand new vaccines, the mathematical modeling component is more about how a disease will spread through a population rather than how a vaccine is going to be produced. So a little bit of a disconnect there.
Interesting. Allie.
Hi. So my question kind of went like more about a question from your bio. Like I saw that you were able to complete 2 majors, work, and play 2 collegiate sports at the same time. How were you able to complete everything and avoid burnout?
Well, I'm very stubborn, so that certainly helped, I think. time management was one of those things that was just sort of trained into us as college athletes. I went to a D3 school, and so I know that the sports side of things is quite a bit different than here at UF. But I played sports through 3 different seasons. So I had, I really had to plan my schedule of, all right, I have 8 a.m. class until 9 a.m. and then another class, and I have to be done and out the door to practice or to games by this time, which means that I have to plan in my homework time here. And really, really sticking to that schedule and being very, just very scheduled and disciplined in that way. But that being said, we also had a lot of support from our coaches and from our faculty members who are teaching our classes and from our teammates. So we had, with my soccer team, we all had like a mandatory study hour in the library where we had study groups. We might not be studying the same things for the same classes, but you had to be there. So we found that little family of support, which was really, really helpful. I will say I worked over the summer times. Like I was still taking classes and playing traveling sports in the summers, but it was the schedule is a little bit different in the summertime for me. It is possible. It's tough, but it is possible to get that really diversified experience of all of the pieces that you want to compete in, complete, participate in when you're in college. Because I think a big thing that really helped me with planning for all of that was that I wasn't in school to get a degree. I was in school to set myself up for the career that I wanted. And that's a very big mind shift from what you're usually experiencing in school. It's like the end game is not to get that piece of paper that says you have completed a bachelor's degree at the University of Florida. Your end game should be, what am I doing now that is helping prepare me to be the best candidate for that job that I want to have for my entire career? Yeah.
That is a great soundbite for the whole Beyond 120 mission right there.
Yes, absolutely.
Esther.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question today, coming from, again, your bio, but it has to do more of your BioQuest curriculum. And I know that you've done extensive work with implementing math and biology. And I'm really interested to know like what your teaching philosophy is in executing these workshops.
Sure. We just heard part of my teaching philosophy is really just, you're not here for a degree, you're here to set yourself up for success in whatever you choose to do. In the classroom, I do a lot of things. You can ask any of my students what they feel about that. But we do a lot of hands-on activities. I think that I really appreciate having multiple ways for students to interact with the material. So for example, in that pandemics class that we talked about earlier, we have traditional lectures, yes, but we also have activities. Like when we were learning about plague, we played a card trading game to simulate how the plague was spreading through a population of students who were in different socioeconomic classes, and then relating that back to the documentary that they watched and tying that into our lecture material. So having those different aspects, I think, gets us to a higher Bloom's taxonomy level, which is that teaching phrase that if you ask any of your professors, hopefully they'll know, which is moving from just that regurgitation of information, right? I don't just want you to memorize things. I want you to be able to apply that knowledge to a brand new scenario and use some evidence that we might have learned from that documentary or from our lecture, from our activity, and apply it to your reasoning for that new scenario. Yeah, so I've got a lot of different components in my teaching statement, which we can talk about in more detail if you want, but that's a big one.
Thank you.
Okay, Murthika.
Hi, I had a question more about like, I saw in your bio that like you attended a few summer camps at the Minnesota Zoo,
Yes.
and that you went from like wanting to be a veterinarian to like being a biologist. And I was wondering like how that like transpired.
Sure. So I think a lot of kids have that desire to work with animals, and I was certainly one of them. And I was super lucky and fortunate to be able to have that the opportunity to go to zoo camp when I was a fairly small child. And, you know, I got to feed the sharks in the big aquarium, and I got to see a dolphin being born, and that was fantastic. But as I started to go through school and what I was learning related to biology was that I wanted to do more than that. I wanted to create new knowledge, and I love teaching. And so I didn't think that I could satisfy all of my interests, that career interest path, by going the pre-vet route. And that changed pretty quickly, I think. So, you know, by the time when I first started college, I had declared as a biomedical engineer because of my math bio background and interests. And then I took physics. And you should ask your professors what they struggled with, because I actually failed physics the first time I took it, and I've still managed to have a very successful career. But because of that experience with physics, I changed to a bio and math double major instead of an engineering major, because physics just wasn't my cup of tea. The concepts were very difficult for me to grasp. And that contributed immensely to changing my career path as well. But zoo camp, I mean, if you can ever go to zoo camp, you totally should, even as an adult.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, Joaquin.
Hi. So this is kind of regarding what you were just talking about. So like during your like college years, did you ever like participate in any research opportunities, and like did that help you like discover what you wanted to do like later on?
Absolutely. So I was a McNair Scholar, which is a program for historically excluded groups in their field of choice. And I was also a participant in a program called North Star STEM Scholars, which is another group for historically excluded groups of students focused in the STEM fields. And so my participation in those programs opened up a lot of doors for me to complete research. That being said, I participated in those very late in the game. So like in between my junior to senior year that summer, as well as during my senior year. So I wish that I could have gotten into it a little bit earlier, but when I went to interview for grad programs, that was a really big thing that they appreciated, was that participation in a research experience, regardless of what it might look like. Because you're being trained in it to think about science in a slightly different way, or trying to think about whatever your field is in a slightly different way, moving from that knowledge absorber. I like to call students sort of sponges, right? In college, you're just expected to absorb all of this knowledge. And when you move into that next step, especially for graduate school, you're expected to produce new knowledge. And it's a really rough transition to make. And so having some of that undergrad research experience helps you ease into that transition a little bit easier in my mind. So I did participate in that. I did a mathematical modeling research project with a math professor all about the spread of the 2009 flu pandemic through a closed population. And then I also participated in a summer like math bio camp at Michigan State University, which was a little bit more structured in terms of what we were learning and applying. Yeah. But there are lots of opportunities out there to get involved in research, from NSF supported, National Science Foundation supported REUs, which are research experiences for undergraduates. Those are summer programs where you are paid to do research. You get to relocate for the summer to a different institution, get a brand new experience. You get some professional development with it likely, and all of these things, including room and board, and you're with a little cohort. And so that is a great opportunity. And we, of course, at UF, you go to such a huge school, you've got a lot of available resources here as well. So we do research for credit hours. We do, we've got CURE courses. I know that the Beyond 120 program has those. We're developing them in geography, and there are summer research programs. There's scholarships available to support you doing research as well. So there's lots of different avenues to get that experience. So hopefully it does seem a little bit overwhelming probably, but it's very attainable.
Awesome. Yeah, really good overview of everything that's available. And the whole producer consumer paradigm, I hope people remember, ties in well with our very first reading we did for this summer group. A more specific question from someone in the online, Haley Roselle, is someone who's hoping to get a GIS certificate
Yeah.
and wanted to know, other than taking courses, what are good ways to learn GIS, or do you know of any exercises that are helpful in developing ArcGIS or GIS skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So the university supports some of these extra trainings that you can do asynchronously. And I think it's called LinkedIn Learning is what we have available now. And you can sign up for self-guided tutorials, and there are some really great GIS ones. We also have a couple of faculty members in our department who have really fantastic YouTube channels where they've recorded all of their how-to videos. And honestly, if I have questions, if I get stuck, those are the help channels on YouTube that I go to. So one of the other instructional professors in our department, Anwar, he has designed a lot of these videos. And so if you've got questions, his is the YouTube channel to check out for GIS related things.
Yeah, is there a link on where would students find?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, you don't have to find it right now. If you want to share it with me later, I can
Yeah, I'll
circulate it
send
on
you.
the Canvas as well.
I'll send you a new link. Let me write it down so I don't forget.
Sounds good.
Yes.
And while you're working on that, another question from the pre-submitted questions, Xuan Wen is asking about, so you had a question earlier about burnout as an undergraduate. This is about sort of your career now, teaching a lot, being involved in research activities. How do you achieve work-life balance?
Oh, I was not very good at this when I first started this job, especially when we first went online in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. And my husband sat me down and said, you got to change something. Something has to give because you're putting too much time into these things and you're going to burn out. You're going to hate your job. You're going to hate everything about this. And he knew that was not what I wanted. So now I do a little bit better at it. I'm still working on it. I do a little bit better about, I'm very clear with my students that I am a real life person. All of your professors, your TAs, we are real people with lives outside of the classroom. And so when I go home for the day, I don't respond to emails. I don't respond to emails over the weekend. I do my best to not grade on the weekend or when I'm at home, and really just having that very clear separation of work life and home life has been really important.
Too true. Continuing down the list, let's see. This is another COVID-related question from Alyssa Johnson. Coming out of the course description from Introduction of Global Pandemics, about using geographical spread of historical pandemics to predict where the next pandemic will strike. What was COVID-19 predictable? Are all endemics predictable? Can they be predicted, I guess?
So endemics, no, because endemic is sort of that background level of disease that we always have, right? We always have flu year round, but we have an annual flu season, which is an annual flu epidemic, where we see a spike over that background or that threshold where we would consider it to be an epidemic. And with flu, for example, we can predict when it's going to happen because we have very, very good data collection available of, all right, in the United States, we have a pretty well-defined flu season. So prior to flu season, we start to ramp up some of those interventions, right? We start getting the messaging out that you should get a flu shot. We get other individuals on board, like you get a flu shot at Publix, you get a $10 gift card. Those sorts of incentives get put out before flu season so that we can prepare the population for it. With COVID being a brand new disease that we had never seen in the human population before, it's more difficult to predict when and where those events are going to happen. However, we also know that there are globally some trends or hotspots where spillover, which is when a disease is in an animal population, that spills over into the human population. We know there are some locations around the planet where that is more likely to happen for lots and lots of different reasons, but things like population density, poverty, access to clean water, those sorts of things all play into the chances of spillover occurring. And we've had a lot of diseases coming out of Asia and all of the countries that are there, and that is not because of anything specific to that location. That is because we have sort of the perfect storm of high population densities in small geographic spaces, quite a lot of animal diversity, and a substantial amount of human-animal interactions that just provides all of those opportunities for a disease to spill over. So my colleague Sadie Ryan has been publishing quite a bit on this. And if you're more interested in sort of the scientific details of predicting where the next disease spillover is going to occur, she has had a few papers come out in the past couple of months that are really fantastic explanations of that science that's happening right now. And it's really groundbreaking work. So I'd encourage you to go take a look at her publications or her Twitter account, where she does sort of the public, easily digestible in a tweet or a tweet thread explanation of some of those main points of those new papers that are coming out.
She's in the geography department as well?
Yeah, she's who I did my second postdoc with. And she also works with the Emerging Pathogens Institute. And yep, she publishes a lot on this sort of thing.
That's the class is burdened with having to select and read a piece of research for an upcoming assignment. So those of you who are interested in the topic might take a look at some of those publications.
Absolutely. And they are paired nicely with some of the press releases from the university that have a little bit more of a digestible spin on the science that could help you understand some of it.
Very nice. Yeah, that's a good tip. You know, when the research is incomprehensible, it helps to have something public facing that's about the same topic to use, kind of decode the heavy stuff. Hannah.
Yeah, so I read that you did the 7-week biomath program at Michigan State, and I saw that it said that you designed experiments and collected data. So I was just wondering what kind of experiments you did and if you found any of the specific experiments to be really interesting or like the most successful.
Yes, so we were constrained in our experimental design. We had to do something with lakes and ponds and crayfish, because the professor that was teaching that section of the summer experience, that was their area of expertise. So the main point of the whole summer program was to be able to combine that math knowledge. So we did 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks of that 7 weeks was taking a week-long math class, essentially. So we did, you know, here's 3 years of calculus and a year of linear algebra in a morning. And then let's learn some chaos theory or maximum likelihood. And then we could apply those mathematical techniques to the data that we collected. So it was really encouraging that linkage, which is what the name of Math Camp was all about. And so the project that I was involved with was looking at predation of crayfish and their responses to their prey. So we had like dragonfly larvae, you can hear my Minnesota accent coming out, and snails and other things that crayfish like to eat. And we measured their response of where they were in their tank after certain periods of time. And then we could apply some maximum likelihood analysis to that, as well as some chaos theory to see what the dynamics were of that interaction. Definitely not my area of expertise. It wasn't, and it still is not, but the math was really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Nuha has a question.
good afternoon. I was wondering what you'd consider your most meaningful experience during undergrad, especially considering since you double majored, that kind of helped you with your research experience and PhD.
Yeah. Oh, that's a tough question. So I think that all of the experiences that I had were meaningful in slightly different ways, and they all contributed to my preparation for going into grad school. Doing the summer research program that we just talked about, that math bio camp, was really, really exciting because I got out of my university to meet new people that were interested in the same things that I was interested in, right? That connection between math and biology. Because at my school, there were 2 classes that could double count towards both majors, and that was it. So there was hardly any overlap. And whenever I told people what I was majoring in, everyone was just like, oh my gosh, that seems like such a weird combination of degrees. It's really not, because you do use a lot of math and biology, and applied mathematics can be very bio heavy. But that was not my experience taking courses. So getting some of those research experiences that were very much at the intersection of math and biology was probably the most meaningful thing, but I couldn't pinpoint like that one experience that was make it or break it for me.
Thank you.
I wanted to be sure we had time for this question. It's an interesting one from Jessica Hetty about your work with the deaf community. What inspired you to incorporate deaf inclusivity into your academic work, your teaching? What has the process of incorporating deaf accessibility into higher ed looked like for you?
You guys really did a deep dive into my background. While I was working with BioQuest, we designed and ran a summer workshop every summer, and I was heavily involved in that. And working with the CUBES project, which was the NSF funded project that I was hired to work on, one of the other members of that project was getting her degree in ASL and was interested in being an interpreter. And we also worked with quite a few individuals who had physical disabilities. So vision impaired individuals, as well as hearing impaired individuals, and those who might have mobility issues. So all of that led to my really big focus. And again, going back to my teaching statement and my teaching philosophy, it's all about that access and inclusivity in, I want to make sure that everybody who's taking a class with me or interacts with me has everything that they need to be successful. And I think it's a sort of a two-way street, that open line of communication. What I've been trained in might not work as well as something else that a student might have experienced. And so that, just going off the teaching philosophy side of things is one of the reasons why I'm still very committed to it. But my experiences in the past, we went to Gallaudet University, which is in DC, and they are they're one of the leading universities in the country and even the world that primarily has a student body that's primarily vision impaired, that's hearing impaired. And so getting into those classrooms and seeing how biology labs can be taught in a very accessible way that are, the same biology labs that I had as an undergrad and would teach as, an instructor, but just the material was presented in a slightly different way. It was fascinating. And we use these things called universal design principles, which means that any changes that we make to our curriculum or to our teaching method, it's great for those who might have those impairments, those disabilities, but it's also great for everybody else, right? So when I talk and I'm presenting a figure from a scientific paper, for example, I explain exactly what each axis is. I explain what all of the colors are. I explain what the size of a bubble might represent. And that helps not just those who are vision impaired or hearing impaired, but also helps anybody who's in the class. So I don't really know if that answers the question. I hope it does. I'm very passionate about it. I could probably go on for hours. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Things you wouldn't normally think about if you hadn't looked at it from that perspective. There's another question from, let's see, Maida Bilal asks, another question about your undergrad experience. People are interested in that kind of formative phase since they're in it now. If there was something during your busy and intense years of undergrad that you would have done differently if you could go back, anything you would change, knowing what you know now?
It's going to sound super cliche if you've talked to any other faculty member, but just accepting that things are going to happen and not being as stressed out about them, right? I am a very high anxiety, high stress load kind of person. That's just who I am and how I function. I wish that I would have gone to the DRC early or at all during my undergrad or graduate career and talked to them about managing that and getting accommodations for my super high test anxiety. I didn't take advantage of those resources, and I think that I could have benefited from them. So realizing it sort of goes along with that imposter syndrome, if you've talked about that so far, goes along with realizing that, everybody's in the same boat. We just, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And then recognizing that there are places and resources that are there for you to take advantage of, right? You're paying all of your fees for the university. You might as well take advantage of those resources because it will, again, help you get everything that you need in order to be successful. And I wish that I would have done that.
It's good advice. Any last questions from the folks that are on the Zoom call? We're going to wrap up in the next couple of minutes here. Anybody had a question they wanted to ask and didn't get a chance to?
While you think of that last question, I'll do a pitch for our department.
Please do.
We have a lot of faculty in our department who work with undergrads doing these research experiences, whether it's research for credit hours or paid positions or volunteer positions across the fall or the spring or even in the summertime. And we're working to get a summer research program up and off the ground for next summer. And we do have a couple of paid positions that labs are advertising. So I would encourage you to, I know geography might be a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but we have a lot of students in our department who go on to get PhDs, who go work for the CDC, who go to medical school or other professional schools. And so we have a lot of success at guiding students through this sort of one-on-one, very small group experiences with research.
So these are mostly open to non-majors?
They can be. If you are lacking some of the sort of GIS skills or data analysis skills, then now is the perfect time to sign up for those courses in the fall, if you have room in your schedule, so that you could be successful in those research programs or their labs.
I know a lot of you guys are somewhere in the kind of pre-health umbrella, so I'm sure there's some people who are interested.
Medical geography.
Yeah, interested in human disease and how it spreads through different vectors. So thank you so much for coming and giving us your time and your wisdom. Any final kind of thoughts or parting pieces of advice for the group, knowing this is a group of people who are interested in getting involved in research?
Don't get discouraged by the lack of responses from faculty. I know that it can be really, really intimidating to just cold email a whole bunch of faculty asking for a position in their lab. And just recognize the fact that we get a lot of emails every day. And so in that cold email that you're sending, make it very clear that you have done a little bit of background research. Attach your CV or your resume. Put in a statement of, here's how I think I will fit into your lab based on, hey, you just published something along those lines. There's a technique that I know how to do or I want to learn. Here's how participating in your lab will get me to where I want to be career-wise. That will get you more responses, but even if you don't get a response, don't get discouraged and just keep sending them out.
Awesome. Yeah, fit is huge. We've got a whole unit on sending out the email coming up.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's not about, your fancy high GPA, whatever accomplishments. It's about what can you bring and what are you going to get out of it?
Exactly. Yes. In that cold email, I don't want your GPA to be the first thing that I see. I want it to be clear that you have done some research into what I do and how we can be mutually beneficial to each other.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming and chatting with us. It's been fantastic.
Absolutely.
Great rest of your afternoon.
Yes, and I am available via email. Dr. Watson can send out my contact information if anybody has follow-up questions. I'm happy to chat more.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.